Welcome back to Badger Blitz TV, your Rivals.com destination for all things Wisconsin athletics. Once again, I'm Matt Perkins, joined today by Rivals.com national recruiting analyst and Texas quarterback guru Nick Harris from Dallas, Texas. Nick, we're really excited to have you on today to talk air raid and all things Texas quarterbacks.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you guys for having me on. Once Phil Longo was hired, I figured we'd be having some conversations in the near future, but I didn't think it'd be this many conversations, so I'm excited to dive into it.
Yeah, there's a lot of great stuff happening, obviously, for Badger fans. Super excited about everything that is going on. Completely new offense. So you already mentioned Phil Longo. Let's dive right into it. He is bringing what a lot of people are calling the Mike Leach air raid. Personally, I'd call it more of a modified air raid, considering how willing he is to use the ground game in his schemes. Let's just talk sort of big picture, 30,000 feet about Longo's air raid. What can Badger fans expect to see on the field from this offense?
Yeah, absolutely. Think of like a new and improved air raid. You mentioned the run game. I think that's probably the perfect catalyst that, helps Longo's system work a little bit more effectively than, maybe some other air raids that have been around for decades longer, just because the game is constantly changing and offensive systems are constantly changing. And him being able to work in the run game and, still get the running backs involved while also getting 35, 40, 45 attempts to your quarterback as well. That helps. That's helped North Carolina be really successful, and that's helped him be really successful at other stops, whether it be Sam Houston State or some of the other places he's been as offensive coordinator. And, and bringing that to the Big Ten, I think that's going to be really interesting. And, they're not afraid to go ahead and get these gunslinger quarterbacks and go ahead and place whoever works in the system. And I think they have a good group of guys that we're going to get into here shortly.
Yeah, and you mentioned they've got a good group of guys. They seem to be mining the Texas quarterback pipeline. They've brought in three portal quarterbacks, I should say, and one 2024 in Mettauer. And all four are from Texas. All four are from high school air raid systems, right? These aren't kids who got to college and then started learning this system. These are kids who have been airing it out forever, and we are not accustomed to seeing that at Wisconsin at all. It's always been, pro formation, power I. You get kids who've played mostly, that sort of Midwest style of football growing up. How important is it for Longo and the Badgers to establish, or in Longo's case, reestablish this Texas quarterback pipeline? And what can that do for recruiting as a whole going forward for the Badgers?
Yeah, I think the strategy early on has been really effective, and being able to bring in multiple guys that will be able to compete not only in this spring, but in future springs. I mean, we're talking the next 2 to 3, spring footballs. There's going to be some quarterback competition with guys from Texas, and how that affects recruiting overall. That extends to around the state and around different position groups. Wisconsin has been able to dive in and get some defensive backs in the past, or running back in the past in the state of Texas, but to be able to really get a high profile signal caller and let him be the bell cow of a class, similar to what they're trying to do in the class of 2024 with Mabrey Mettauer, and just kind of build the class around him with some guys in the area. I think it's going to be pretty interesting, and I'm curious to see, how they attack that class of 2024 now that they have a Texas quarterback, leading the charge, and, how much do they dip into the state? How much do they stay close to the Midwest? I think it's going to be a really fascinating perspective on their recruiting skills going forward.
Obviously Longo has these Texas connections, and that's huge for Wisconsin recruiting. Even in the last 6 weeks, has Wisconsin sort of been on the minds and mouths of players that maybe really didn't know Wisconsin as a national brand before this?
Talking to some 2024 recruits, I think just kind of a lot of the coaching changes have really been, standing out, whether it be Nebraska, Colorado, Wisconsin. They're just kind of taking it all in at once. But Wisconsin is definitely a name that has been brought up just because of what Luke Fickell was able to do at Cincinnati with the limited resources that he had at a Group of 5 school. And, how does that translate to a Power 5 program that, has rich tradition and is really prestigious and, has a history of winning in the Big Ten as well. So, I think it's exciting some players as well. But also, Big Ten country is slightly foreign to recruits in the state of Texas if it's not Ohio State or Michigan or something like that. So, I'm very curious to see how Nebraska and Wisconsin, now that they have Texas ties on the staff, how do they come into the Lone Star State? How do they get these guys, and how do they build a lasting presence as well? Because you can recruit really well in the class of 2024 in the state of Texas and bring in 5-6 guys from the state, but if you can't develop those guys and help them move forward and kind of build a brand from Texas to Wisconsin, then that's tough to build on in the 25, 26, 27 classes. So this first class will be really important towards those efforts, but based on the hires that they've made, I think they're definitely trying to create a presence in Texas.
All right, well, let's talk about some of these kids then that they have brought in. I should say kids. The first one's not a kid. The first one is a full-grown man, and that's Tanner. That's Tanner Mordecai, because Mordecai is entering his final season of eligibility. Obviously, started at Oklahoma, recruited by Lincoln Riley, transferred to SMU, has put up huge numbers for the Ponies in the best threads in all of college football. I'm saying that as a Wisconsin fan. I firmly believe SMU has the best uniforms in all of college football as a whole set. But let's talk about Mordecai, because we have, everyone thought Graham Mertz coming out of high school, this is going to be the guy that slings it all over the field. He wasn't that. You can blame system, you can blame talent, you can blame whatever you want. The fact is that he didn't live up to that high 4-star billing. Now, Mordecai came out as a high 3-star, 4-star in some services, and I think he's definitely proven in the last couple of years at SMU that arm talent is definitely there. What kind of, we're going to go through the tape here. What kind of quarterback are the Badgers getting in Mordecai?
Yeah, definitely a gunslinger, a guy that has great pocket presence. Kind of going back to his high school days at Waco Midway down in Central Texas, this is kind of a testament to how much he was gunslinging even in high school. In the 6A state championship in his senior year, one of his receivers set the state championship record for receiving yards, and they still lost by 15 points. So they love to air the ball out and put the ball in his hands and let him work. And he was able to do that at SMU too, whether it be under Sonny Dykes last year or under Rhett Lashley this season. They put the ball in the hands of Tanner Mordecai and said, lead us to victory. And he was able to do that quite a bit. One of the more successful teams over the past 2 seasons in the American Athletic Conference. And it's Mordecai's a big reason. He's got a big arm. He knows how to get it to those speed guys. He creates rhythm with those guys very early on. And he's used to playing with speedy receivers as well. And I think that's going to be really important for Wisconsin as well, to build some speed around him, just because he is a guy that can get the ball in the hands of those guys. Sometimes you get quarterbacks that, come from a gunslinging high school system or anything like that, and they get to the college level and they're underthrowing guys just because the speed is such a different, dynamic. But I think Mordecai is a guy that can, come in, gel with those receivers really early on and get the ball in their hands and create some big opportunities. At SMU, he was putting up 40, 45, 50 passing attempts a game. I think that's what Phil Longo will probably be looking for, maybe integrating a little bit more of the ground game. But nevertheless, I think he's a guy that can step in year one and really start this transition under the Luke Fickell era.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting in sort of his, his body type, his play style. Each one of the 4 that they brought in are a little bit different. Now, you can all see how, what Longo is looking for, some core attributes of all of them. One of the things that really stands out to Mordecai for me is you see when he's throwing those super fast bubble screens, right? Like right off, he's getting the snap and immediately flinging it out to the full width of the field. Those passes are so fast and so crisp and so on target that it opens up so much for the offense by, you saw what Tennessee did all year with their wide splits. And there, you can see Longo doing some of the exact same stuff with a quarterback who has the arm strength and accuracy to pull off those really fast passes. And I think that Mordecai is a guy that's really going to be able to get that done. Let's take it the first guy, though, that committed to Wisconsin next, and that is Nick Evers. Evers is I think out of the 4 guys, at least at this point, he's probably the most overall athletic of the 4. He can do a lot of things, not just with his arm, but with his legs as well. I think for me, looking at him, his high school tape is a lot of one read and go, but I'm curious as to what, you see in Evers and how he can sort of bring his game to the next level.
Yeah, I got to know Nick Evers and his family really well during his recruitment when he was committed to Florida for much of his recruitment, and then once that staff moved on from, quickly flipped to Oklahoma, spent one season there, and then now he's going to be coming to Madison via the transfer portal. What I was able to see from him, whether it be during his high school days, playing in high school games or at Elite 11 settings or things of that nature, I think he's a guy who will be a little bit of a developmental project, but I think of the four guys that we're going to be talking to today, it's hard to argue that he wouldn't have the highest ceiling just based on what he has been able to do on the 7-on-7 circuit. You mentioned the one quick read and getting the ball out of his hands. He's really adept at doing that. That's what made him so special on the 7-on-7 circuit, because you only get 4 seconds to throw, and he was able to dice up some guys, and he played with some big time receivers on the 7-on-7 circuit as well. So again, he has experience playing with some high profile receivers. Evan Stewart is probably the most notable, the 5-star at Texas A&M right now. But I love his work outside of the pocket. You mentioned his mobility and his athleticism. Being able to escape the pocket as soon as he sees pressure and move towards the hash and still find guys downfield. I think that's what makes him really special. And I really like that Phil Longo brought in a quarterbacks around him that will force him to compete. I think that's going to be really important for him. I see some, Wisconsin fans, whether it be on Twitter or on the message board, being like, hey, if we're bringing in Nick Evers, why are we bringing in all these guys around him? We're going to be scaring him away. I don't think it's that. I think that competition will be really healthy for Nick Evers, and being able to compete alongside those guys, learn some things from those guys. We'll talk about Braedyn Locke here in a second, but I think there's some aspects of Locke's game that Evers could incorporate and can make him an even better signal caller, and vice versa. So, I think he's going to be a very interesting prospect, 1-2 years down the line. And if he can compete for the backup job and win it this spring, I think that would be really encouraging for Wisconsin fans.
Yeah, I could definitely see that being a big boost for Wisconsin fans, because he was sort of the first guy that really got this transfer portal rolling for the Badgers, right? And so he was the first big name that came in, and everyone else has been dominoes after that. And I think, he obviously, meant a lot to this portal class, if you will, right? It's going to be a big portal class. There's a lot of scholarships to fill for Luke Fickell and company in the recruiting department. So they are able to be aggressive in the transfer portal. You're right. It did catch some people off guard, though, that Braedyn Locke, is also going to be coming in. He now becomes the third class of 2022 quarterback on the roster, alongside Evers and Miles Burkett, who is the in-state quarterback that they took last year. Locke is a little bit different. He's a little bit shorter, got a little bit quicker release. And I'll be honest, out of the four, the one I know the least about. So educate me, educate the masses about who Braedyn Locke is and what makes him special as a prospect.
Yeah, Braedyn Locke, he's from my hometown, so I've gotten to know him for quite a long time, going back to his very early high school days. We could start with his high school days as a sophomore in high school. He was starting at Rockwall High School, which is one of the more fast-paced air raid offenses in the entire state of Texas. And his star receiver was Jackson Smith-Njigba, who was the 5-star that went on to Ohio State and is already getting first and second round draft grades here in the draft in this upcoming April. So he's played with some weapons himself, and he is the career passing yards leader in the state of Texas at the 6A level, and is second in passing touchdowns. So, he can definitely sling the ball and get it around to his playmakers. And, I think that one of the more encouraging things that I saw from Braedyn Locke during his high school years was his senior season, when he didn't have Jackson Smith-Njigba, and he was dealing, just with his regular high school receivers. And he still threw for as many yards and was still able to be as productive and lead his team to, as great of playoff success. So, being able to work with guys, no matter their skill set, I think that's really important looking forward, just because I think he'll be able to really work with the scout team this year, work with the second, third stringers this year, if that's what he ends up earning. I think that'll be really helpful towards, game planning for Wisconsin going forward as far as the immediate future here in 2023. But what he could bring in 2024 or in the future, he's really smart in the pocket, a really great pocket presence. Doesn't have as much athleticism as these other guys, but he makes up for it in being able to make quick reads downfield or get the ball out of his hands and throw it out of bounds. He does not make bad decisions, and that's tough to find when you find just a true pocket quarterback. Sometimes they're trying to force things once the pocket crashes on them, but he's really good about making his decisions. I think he's one of the more smarter quarterbacks in the entire state of Texas that's come through in the last 2 to 3 years. I think the one negative that you could probably really look at is probably his physical profile. 6'1", 195 pounds, but I think he makes up for it with the cannon that he has for a right arm, and being able to learn under Mike Leach for one season. I think that was really important towards his growth as well, and I think that'll help transition him into Phil Longo's system really well. And as far as the quote unquote out of the blue commitment that this was, it kind of makes sense if you understood Locke's recruitment and where he came from, and as well as Phil Longo and how involved he was in his high school recruitment. During his high school recruitment, he came down to Mississippi State and North Carolina, and it was a really close battle up until the very last day, and he made his decision to go to Mississippi State. And it was simply because he grew up idolizing Mike Leach. His quarterback coach had played for Mike Leach, and there were just some factors that Phil Longo couldn't overcome. But when he hit the portal, it just made sense that marriage went ahead and happened, and now he's going to be heading to Madison. And I like it because it creates competition in a quarterback room that has not seen a lot of quarterback competition in the last couple of decades. And you could probably speak more to that, Matt Perkins. But I think there's a lot of healthy things going on in that quarterback room moving forward.
That is absolutely true about the somewhat lack of quarterback competition over the past decade or so in the post-Russell Wilson era, let's say. But there's going to be just as much competition come this time next year. Tanner Mordecai is going to be out, and Mabrey Mettauer is going to be in. And he's a big kid who I love his athleticism. I like he just seems to have, he looks like the prototype quarterback because he looks like he's Trevor Lawrence. And B, he is just, 6'6" kid, like big arm. He's not afraid to lower his shoulder. And you see all the physical tools there with him. What do you see when you put on the tape?
Yeah, another productive quarterback at the 6A level that can get it done with his arm and get it done with his legs. Of the four, I like the Nick Evers being the most athletic quarterback of the four. You could definitely make that case, but I would go for Mabrey Mettauer, just because his long strides, and he looks like a stallion when he's in the open field, and he can try to get to the end zone. And he's put up rushing totals of 100 plus yards multiple times during his junior season, and at the same time he's still putting the air through the ball. Of the four quarterbacks, I think he does have the highest ceiling just given his physical profile. It's not often you find a 6'6", 220, 230 pound guy like this that can move like this, and he's not afraid to escape the pocket and move downfield with his legs. And he's also pushing it downfield with his arms. And that play right there, hurdling over the defender, I remember when that broke on Twitter, and I was like, yeah, Mabrey Mettauer is athletic. And if you ask him, he's a dual threat guy. But pushing the ball downfield with his arm, I think that's going to be what's most important towards him being in Phil Longo's system. And I think it's going to be an interesting marriage whenever he does get to Madison, and they're able to incorporate some QB reads, some read options, and get him in the open field with his legs, and how do they kind of balance those two things. And I think it could be similar to what Phil Longo did with Drake May at times this year. He was averaging 10, 12 rushing attempts per game, and about 5, 6 of those were design runs. And I think that's probably what Phil Longo is trying to do here with Mettauer. I think they'll probably have to clean up some mechanic issues with him. The ball kind of comes out of his arm a little bit weird, but, as he has continued his high school career, that stuff has only improved. And he's going to have a whole offseason to work on that, and then his senior season as well before he gets to Madison. So, I think he's an interesting quarterback prospect with a very high ceiling, but will take probably a year or two to get really developed. And I think Phil Longo would be the guy to go ahead and develop him and see what they can do with him.
Yeah, well, you mentioned you think that he has the highest ceiling, and I'm inclined to agree, if only because he's the youngest, and so he still has the most potential for growth, right? He is 2 years younger than Evers and then Locke. So you look at the frame, you look at that. I love his upside as well. Tanner Mordecai right now, obviously the highest floor, just because he's seen the most game action, and he's played a lot of football, high level football in his career right now. I think you could make an argument though that Locke might have the highest floor of the other three because of what you talked about and because of that pocket presence and the decision making. Are you on the same page with that you think Locke has the highest floor, or would you take one of the other guys?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Locke is the most sure product based on what he's been able to do and how he's been able to develop up to this point, and also his familiarity with Phil Lingo's system, and what he's been able to learn from him, and the time that he was in high school. Those two grew really close during his high school recruitment, and he was very instrumental in his senior season and kind of helping him work through some things. Now that he had a different challenge without Jackson Smith and Jigba on the field, so having that previous relationship and being able to understand how he thinks and being able to just jump right into Madison with that background, I think that kind of helps contribute towards that as well, giving him that higher floor and his pocket presence for sure.
Is it too easy to say that his comp is Will Rogers? I mean, obviously, same school, same system, but you see a lot of the same stuff. And I hate to be that guy, but it feels like the comp is right there in front of your nose.
Yeah, sometimes the easy comparisons you just have to go with them, and I think that's a really safe one. That was a almost exact prototype what they were looking for on the recruiting trail whenever they were trying to think of a replacement for him, and he would have been able to slide right in under Mike Leach's system and fill in that Will Rogers role. So I think that's actually a great comparison for sure.
Awesome. Well, listen, Nick, we are obviously going to be having you back on again soon, assuming that Wisconsin keeps, going down to the state of Texas to bring up talent to Madison, because let's face it, they need an influx of talent. And, under Longo, especially because of all those ties, they can start to make Texas a priority in recruiting, and that can only go well for the Badgers. So that's going to do it for us here today on Badger Blitz TV. Make sure you're checking out Nick on all the social media. I know you're on Twitter at RivalsNick, Instagram as well.
Don't do a lot of work stuff on Instagram, but if you want to come see me post my bad music taste and post some bad sunset pictures, then come follow me at Nick_Harris15.
All right. Sounds great. Well, Nick, we appreciate it. We'll have you back here again very soon. Make sure you have subscribed here to the Badger Blitz YouTube page. Check out me and Clint Cosgrove every week on Badger Blitz TV, talking Badger recruiting. Subscribe to BadgerBlitz.com. Make sure you're in the Badgers Den on all the message boards where you can hang out with me and Nick and John McNamara and Clint Cosgrove and the rest of the gang in the Badgers Den. Come on down. It's a fun time. And until next time here on Badger Blitz TV, we will see you guys in the den.